Welcome to College Football Roundtable, your source for college football coverage, including major storylines,
playoffs,
can't miss game previews, and picks each week. Join your hosts, Dan, Rob, and Jordan at the Roundtable for a show unlike anything else. As for Football presents the College Football Roundtable.
All right, we're getting close to the end of the season, guys. There have been some doozies in the bowl matchup so far this year. The coaching carousel is wide open. The transfer portal is even more wide open. And I'm thinking that regulation is coming sooner rather than later because there's been some bonkers stuff going on. What's up, Trash Talkers? Welcome back to the College Football Roundtable, or if you prefer, Ring Knocker Radio, or you can just call us two O's and an NCO these days. I'm Rob, the Angry Colonel, calling out of the center of the universe here at Fort Bragg. We've got Dano E. Cabeza out of coastal Connecticut and 13-0 Trigger Joe at the home of the Big House. How's it going today, guys? And what have you been watching? Or is anything that kind of got your attention during the bowl season so far this year?
Yeah, man. I probably haven't watched quite as much college football as I thought that I would. I think I told you guys I was going skiing. We ended up skiing 3 days, like all around Christmas. So I have seen a lot more snow than I have seen college football. My overall impression is that teams that finished the season hot stayed hot. And even if that means your Air Force playing Baylor, you're still being hot is more important than being in the Big 12. And, I was surprised that Troy pulled it out over UTSA. I thought the Roadrunners had the better team for most of the game, but the Trojans won. Same thing for Middle Tennessee State over San Diego State. Like, that was insane. Of the bowls that I've seen, probably the Boca Raton Bowl, Toledo over Liberty was my favorite. Thought the way Toledo was running the option offense was really interesting, and thought I saw some elements there that I'm expecting to see in Army's new offense. So there's a tease.
Yeah. How about you, Joe?
Yeah, early on, I kind of take these games with a grain of salt, but I love seeing Eastern Michigan get a win over San Jose State. They gave me a little bit of love coming out of high school and actually were at some of my games recruiting me, so I always like seeing them do well. Plus, it's EMU. It's been a while. Arkansas and Kansas in the triple OT thriller the other night was a great one. And I'm so bad at remembering the bowl names, probably because there's 67,000 of them now, but UNC covered that 14. I knew when that line came out, I was like, dude, Oregon is gonna Oregon, and Drake May will light you up. And I saw Oregon winning that game by one score, so loved seeing that. And Minnesota took care of business in the first real decent matchup for the Big Ten today against Syracuse, and right now Oklahoma's punched Florida State in the mouth in the first half and is up 3. So
I got to turn that one on. I have not been tracking that. I'm screwing around with dinner. I would never have picked that. Not in a million years.
9.5-point dogs, and they're up 3. So yeah.
It's been interesting. I think guys sitting out has had an impact on it, of course, and that's always going to happen. So it's kind of predictable that you're going to see a dip when some of your skill players take a day off. But those guys got to protect their future. I get it, particularly now with name, image, and likeness. Like, if I don't think the bowl game is worth the TV time, I might take a knee, even if I'm like a junior, just to not jeopardize any injuries or whatever. And Joe and I were talking about that earlier, watching guys, get injured in a bowl game that kind of changes the trajectory of their career in the pros. But we'll dive a little bit deeper into this. Like, again, I've watched a lot of second half of games because the first half is kind of like, who cares? It's a bowl game. They'll work it out. And then the second half is usually pretty interesting. So I caught the second half of the Syracuse game, of course, which looked pretty good, and really anticipating what's going on this weekend. But in short, I pulled these numbers around noon today. So this is the standings of the bowl wins by conference so far. The American has 7 teams in. They are 3-3, so they're at 500. The ACC has 9 teams in. They are 3-1. Big 12 had 8. They are 1-3. The Big 10 is 1-0. Conference USA is 3-3. The Independents are 2-2. Army being the only one that didn't make it in, really. And the MAC is 3-2. Mountain West is 3-3. Pac-12 is 2-1. SEC is 1-3, and the Sun Belt, believe it or not, is 3-4. But they put 7 teams in, so that's pretty impressive. And like we said, the group of 5 teams are starting to pick it up. So when you start looking at some of the also rans or the guys on the outside looking in, they're showing up for these bowl games because that's really their only opportunity really to get TV time And the other part of it is now with the transfer portal being open, hey man, it makes that postseason win that much more dangerous, because once you close out the season, you could bounce to another team. And speaking of that, there's some huge moves so far. So Grayson McCall is out. He's no longer going to be at what is it? Freaking Coastal Carolina. Yeah. I said Coastal all year and screwed it up, and now I can't even think about it. So, yeah, so Grayson McCall is gone. Sam Hartman is on the move. He is in the transfer portal. Rumor has it he's going to land at Notre Dame, which is bonkers, because a guy of that caliber jumping schools, like that's going to be a huge dip for Wake Forest's offense. And hey, if they can figure out a system that they can use that guy in, like the guy's got a cannon. He's going to be playing on Sundays, and Notre Dame will probably get him there a little bit better than Wake Forest. But I know Joe's watching the transfer portal pretty heavy. What do you think about Michigan's move so far?
Well, they're number one in the transfer portal, so you can't ask for any better. The sack master out of Coastal that they got, and I'll screw his name up, but everybody wanted him. Drake Nugent and Chris Hinton's brother out of Stanford, offensive tackle and a center to replace Olowitimi. And then Ladarius Washington out of Arizona State, another huge offensive tackle that's projected to play on Sundays. So Michigan's pretty much figured out what they want to do in the transfer portal, and that is replace our departing linemen. And they've done it twice now and won the Joe Moore Award 2 years back to back. So I think they've figured out a glitch in the matrix with this whole thing about replacing linemen. Maybe you only have to coach up half of them, and the rest of them you can get at the end of the year. And it's worked out really well for him. I mean, Olowitimi won the Outland Trophy, and he's the first Wolverine since I think 86 to win that. And that's a big deal at Michigan.
Yeah, so when you start looking at that, there's something to be said about consistency of play and having the same offensive unit together. However, a well-experienced guy, junior or senior, coming into your program, that's instant leadership. And if he's been playing or starting that long, the guy has some talent that can transfer over, especially if he's coming through the portal. If you're looking at the top positions right now, guys that are in the portal, most of them are skill players. You've got a bunch of dudes, of course. Surprise, surprise from JSU. You got 5 stars moving over to Colorado because of Coach Sanders moving over there. You've got Ernest Hausman transferred from Nebraska to Michigan. He's a linebacker. You got Denver Harris, quarterback. Again, he went from Texas A&M to LSU, and I think we're still going to see more of this. Number 5, of course, we were talking about is, with a bullet, is Sam Hartman. He's out and he's open, so we don't know where he's going to. Devin Leary, the quarterback from NC State, transferred out too. So, you're seeing a lot of guys just pick up and move. And when you're looking at the top 10, the top 5 guys are defensive players, but, 5 through 7, 8, 9, and 10 are all offensive players, right? So they're all moving on to different places and probably looking at places that have a better scheme that they can plug into. But I can tell you for certain, Coastal Carolina and Wake Forest are hurting because their QBs are now gone. Dan, you got something?
Yeah, it's just it's a little interesting to talk about the culture of these programs. I mean, you got Texas A&M that brought in that monster recruiting class, all these 5 stars, and built it through NIL. Then they go on this losing run, and suddenly everybody's leaving the program. I mean, that is a bad look for that coaching staff. It'd be interesting to see how that plays out over time.
Yeah, and I know Jimbo was catching heat at the beginning of the season too, because he was talking crap about how Alabama does it, but clearly something is going on inside that locker room that are making players leave. So
yeah,
I mean,
dudes don't want to hear it.
Yeah, and you're Texas A&M, you're in the SEC. I mean, that's the gateway to a championship. At least it has been for many, many years. But now, things are starting to change. We can see the landscape moving. But with the transfer portal, man, these guys are jumping ship in droves. And I think that's going to end up hurting these teams that, may have these storied programs 5 or 10 years ago, but they don't have the ability to win. And I think all the departures from Texas A&M is purely because they bought in all this talent. I've got all these 5 stars in competition trying to play different positions, and then we still lost. What gives? I think it's an embarrassment of riches for them, but we'll see how it goes. For me, like I said, watching quite a few bowl games, but this is when I start getting excited. As we start closing in on New Year's, that's when I get excited because that's when the bigger bowl games are showing up, and these are the ones that are most notable. And that's purely because more of the guys are not going to sit out. But we will pause very, very quickly and toss it back over to Joe for his Blue Falcon of the week.
You teased it again. But see, I'm gonna play devil's advocate and argue for the other side here. I will say this: it's more of a rant. But isn't it strange how much these players have transitioned college football to mimic the pros inside of 2 years?
Yeah.
And then incredible. They're all getting paid. They're all playing at multiple universities. It's no big deal. That's a thing now. So my issue is this. All right. If you've got the NIL in place, we're talking about like the top 1 percentile of players that really have a real decision to make as to whether or not it's worthwhile for them to sit out in their bowl game because of the NIL. If it's not about the NIL and you're on a New Year's 6 bowl game, are you telling me that half of Alabama's roster is going to sit out then because they're playing on Sundays? Because I don't think that's true. And at some point, what I was talking to Colonel Rob about on the phone, it's like, it's got to be you join something bigger than yourself. And I feel like they're moving away from that. So my Blue Falcon is the player that sits out a New Year's 6 game simply because it's the easier route. You know, I remember a year, and I always go back to Michigan football, but Chase Winovich played his entire last season at Michigan, hurt for the last 4 games and hurt badly. And they asked him in the Ohio State game, which they lost, will you be out there? And he said, you'll have to kill me. And then in the bowl game, after they lost to Ohio State and the season was done in most Michigan fans' eyes, did he sit out? No. Still playing in the NFL, still playing in the league, didn't hurt him any. I get that there's always that risk of injury, but that's the risk you've taken for the last 14 weeks. And right now, there's more people than just your family dependent on you. You know, the rest of the team is, and their families are too. So I feel like at some point, if you bring a dynamic to the team, like Eric Gray sitting out today for Oklahoma, he's a huge part of that offense. And to me, part of it is a mask for laziness. I'm sorry. Like, all right, it's just going to be easier to sit that last game out and start training for the combine. Of course it is. But at what point is the team more important than the individual? And that's really what it is. It's not necessarily a Blue Falcon. It's more of a rant about, like, don't lose the majesty of college football to sound corny. You know, and that's basically my point, is the guy that sits out when he's hurting the team more than he's helping himself. That to me is a Blue Falcon in definition. So that's my rant. Go ahead, man.
Notable. Sorry
sense.
to cut you off. I just wanted to note that all of Alabama's players are playing in the bowl game against K-State. That's the bowl game where nobody's sitting out, which is pretty interesting, right?
Right. Yeah, because otherwise that matchup isn't interesting to me at all.
No, absolutely.
Kansas, right.
Yeah, because like if Bama is missing half their roster, then Bama can't do what Bama does. You know what I mean? And so that would change the trajectory of that game. And I'm surprised that a lot of these guys are sitting out. I can see like even a couple of years ago when Missouri was playing Army, I could see like their starting running back. He's like, yeah, I'm going to sit out of this one. And for 2 reasons. One, we know that the Army team is tougher than they look. We're going to get beat up. And I don't want, like seriously, I don't want to get my ass kicked, you know, in the last game of the season and potentially get injured. And so I can completely understand that. But, you know, look at Air Force against Baylor. I guarantee you Baylor didn't send anybody out, you know, because if they did, they paid for it, and they paid for it hugely. And again, when it comes to name, image, and likeness and recruiting and everything else, you have to put your best foot forward because, again, people are at home right now. Their Saturdays aren't busy. It's on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. If you aren't playing well in these bowl games, you're actually hurting your recruiting because, again, the recency effect is, hey, the last thing I saw is going to be the most important thing that I remember. So if I, you know, go out there and lay an egg like Oregon did, then people are going to be like, well, I don't want to go play for them because these guys keep dropping games at the end of the season. And I think that's a trend that we'll see even more as, NIL gets more firm. But let's talk service academies real quick and coaching moves. Dana, what you got?
Yeah, so Army had an offensive coordinator change. We're going to obviously talk about this much more on the other show, but Brent Davis, the longtime OC for the Black Knights, is out. They're moving to a co-offensive coordinator system. Former University of Nebraska Kearney assistant coach Drew Thatcher will be the new offensive coordinator, and then Army tight ends coach Matt Drinkle will be the co-offensive coordinator. We believe Thatcher is going to call the plays. It looks like they're going to go to a new look for the offense, and James from Brigade Review is doing sort of a deep dive on what that's going to look like. So if you're interested in that, that's a tease. Look for that over the next few months probably. You ain't going to see it until the next season. So open question what it's going to look like. On the Screaming Goat side, Navy fired longtime coach Ken Niumatalolo. He is out. Brian Newberry, the former Navy defensive coordinator, is now the head coach. It has to be a personal thing, right? Because you keep Brian Newberry to try to keep all your recruits and all your players and really not shake up the system too much. But clearly, the athletic director didn't want Niumatalolo in there anymore. It looks like they're going to have a decent team next year, or at least they would have with Coach Ken. So who knows? Rob's got in here that as an Army fan, he hopes that Navy is entering their Todd Berry phase. I don't necessarily think we're going to see that, but man, I wouldn't mind watching them struggle for 10 years. Air Force held on to Troy Calhoun. I'm a little surprised about that. I thought that this might be the year. Dude, what is it about Calhoun? How many times does he have to win 10 games and beat some Power 5 school to prove anything to anybody? But, he's been very successful for the Zoomies. Not necessarily anybody from Army's favorite guy, but whoa. Then coaching carousel, we talked about Deion Sanders to Colorado. Matt Rule is now the head coach at Nebraska from the Panthers. That strikes me as a pretty good move back from the pros. Luke Fickell from Cincinnati to Wisconsin. Hugh Freeze has gone from Liberty to Auburn. And finally, Jeff Brom has gone from Purdue to Louisville. That's a weird move. That seems like a lateral at best. So I don't know what that's about, but what can you do? That's all I got.
Yeah. Hey, thoughts on these big coaching moves, guys? What do you think?
I mean, Hugh Freeze was getting $4 million a year from Liberty. So what is he making now at Auburn? Holy smokes. And Jeff Brom, I'm really surprised you go from Purdue to Louisville. Like that's a weird one to me.
Yeah, I mean, particularly like from the defensive perspective, or the spoiler makers, man, you built that reputation. You had that reputation as a team that could win and knock off some big name opponents in the Big Ten. Like, why would you give that up? Because I just don't see, like, okay, if it was Louisville for 4 or 5 years ago when Lamar Jackson was there, like, absolutely, like I would jump on that train and twice on Sunday. But it's Louisville from this season, which wasn't very impressive. Joe, you look like you got some thoughts, man.
Well, you're also looking at a different academic standard at Louisville. So I'm just saying, it's a little easier to recruit being that far down south, and Purdue is an academic institution. So I'll just give them that much credit. But I do agree. I don't even believe it's a lateral move. I think it's a step down. But Luke Fickell coming back to the Big Ten, it should be interesting to see if he thinks there was pressure to win at Cincinnati. Wait till he gets to Madison, because they're not going to put up with too many seasons of him misfiring, and he's going to have to play, some teams from Michigan and Ohio State side every year. I don't know if he's going to get to skip out like half those teams on that side do on Ohio State or skip out on Michigan, but he's going to have to play one of them, and he's going to have to do better than he did when he was at Ohio State. So it'll be interesting to see. I think it's a good hire, but Madison is a place where he's going to have to win. He's going to have to win quick. So I do think he's a good coach, but it's just interesting coming from Ohio State back all the way around to Wisconsin. So they'll be watching that one.
It is interesting too. Cincinnati's moving up to the Big 12. So now you're going from the Big 12 to the Big 10 and a program that you built. And I'm sure the money's better at Wisconsin. Certainly it's a bigger, more prestigious program in general, but you have an opportunity to like make your freaking reputation at Cincinnati in a way that I'm not sure that you do at Wisconsin.
Yeah. Well, my only thought on it is him as a head coach, because he's more of a defensive guy. He's a defensive and special teams guy, so he's done defense and special teams as a coach. So I think he'll bring that flavor to Wisconsin, which is something that they've been missing, because those guys always can pull out a Melvin Gordon out of somewhere. They're always going to have a running back that's a 5-star, 4 or 5-star recruit that's going to show up. So offensively, if they don't make very many changes, if he can tighten up the defense and the special teams, then maybe, Wisconsin is close in the next couple of years of getting to the Big Ten championship. But again, like the road goes through either, Ann Arbor or Columbus. And that is a tough road to hoe for a Wisconsin team. And they have to be really, really good. I can't even remember the last time Wisconsin beat Ohio State or Michigan in a head-to-head matchup.
Yeah,
I know
got to pull a 5-star offensive tackle again, like they did the last 4 or 5 years. They stopped doing that.
Yeah.
So it shows.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see because, like, again, these moves, Hugh Freeze going to down south, man. I mean, I get it. It puts more eyeballs on you. And then, of course, the vicious rumor that came out today, which I thought was laughable because it's not true. But the Denver Broncos started talking about, hey, we'll talk to Saban and bring him here as the head coach in the Mile High City. Yeah, it's straight clickbait. Somebody put it out there just to be inflammatory, but I don't think we'll ever see Nick Saban back in the pros. I think he's comfortable where he is at Alabama. I think he's gonna try and be the next Bear Bryant and just coach until they make him leave or he decides to retire, because I don't think he's gonna leave.
Plus, John Elway is not hiring Nick Saban. That's all I'm gonna say about that.
Yeah, fair point. All right, so we're going to move on to basically the games of the weekend rather than games of the week, because these are the only 2 matchups that matter for us as players. I know that there's some other games that are going to be on this week. There's a couple big ones. The Alamo Bowl looks pretty good. I mean, I looked at the line on that one. Looks pretty interesting. We've got some decent games coming up, but like, again, the ones I'm really hanging my hat on are going to be the playoff games this weekend. But like when you look at the rest of the slate, and I'm not going to go particularly in any specific order, but right now you've got Oklahoma up 14-11 on Florida State. They're punching them in the face. You got Texas and Washington playing later on tonight. You've got Maryland and NC State kicking tomorrow at noon. You've got Pitt and UCLA kicking tomorrow at noon. The spread on that one's 7.5. You got Notre Dame and South Carolina. That one's going to be a good one. I will probably sit down and actually watch that game. Because Spencer Rattler, man, that guy turned into like fuego the last few games of the season. And it'll be interesting to see Notre Dame, what kind of offense they come out in, particularly thinking if you're trying to court Sam Hartman, you better be throwing a hell of a lot more than you did all season. So it'll be interesting to see how that matchup looks like. I think that'll be a duel of quarterbacks either way. But then you got Ohio and Wyoming. That one's mildly interesting, but it still should be a decent game. It's actually going to be on Barstool Sports, so if you have that as a package on your cable, check that one out. Tennessee and Clemson, I think that will be a good one. That's a night game on ESPN. We'll see if Tennessee can bounce back even without Hendon Hooker. They're still a pretty decent team, and of course, we'll see how Clemson can play without DJ. I mean, I think he made a rash decision by jumping into the transfer portal after getting benched, but hey, we'll see what happens. Bama and KSU, we already talked about one that kicks at noon on Saturday. You got Iowa and the University of Kentucky. That should be an interesting game. Probably better matchup on the wrestling mats than it is in football. But hey, whatever. And then getting into the big ones. So we got TCU 12-1 against Michigan. And I'm surprised on both of these games. And then Michigan and TCU kicks at 4. And then you get about a 30-minute break to throw some food down your neck and drink a couple beers. And then you've got Ohio State against UGA at 8 o'clock. Guys, what are your thoughts on these games? We'll kick it over to Dan to kind of preview the Georgia-Ohio State game. What are your thoughts on that one?
I mean, Ohio State has a potentially outstanding passing game with Marvin Harrison Jr. and they've got the great quarterback and everything, but do they have a way to stop Georgia's pass rush? I was looking at some highlights of that today, and Georgia's front seven is just totally elite. If OSU can protect the quarterback and sort of establish a run game, which is a thing they were not necessarily doing at the end of the year, then they probably have offense to hang with Georgia. And in fact, Georgia's offense gets a little stagnant considering the amount of talent that they have. But I do not believe that that's what will happen. I believe that what will happen is that Georgia's defense will eat them up. We'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. I think my thoughts on it is if Ohio State healed up and gets some semblance of a running game, I think it's a different contest. I think that was the big discriminator for Ohio State going into the Michigan game. And so, this is one of those times where having a bunch of time off actually will be helpful as far as getting people healthy. But again, if, CJ Stroud comes out flat in the first half, which he does after they have a little bit of time off, that could be the difference in the game. he can make a mental mistake, interception, or whatever. Joe, I know you got thoughts. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I think that Ohio State actually puts it all together. I don't think they lay an egg, and I think this game, I think it goes to overtime, and Georgia wins. I see Ohio State finally putting it all together, hitting a couple of big bombs to two receivers that are going to play on Sundays, and C.J. Stroud not letting that be his last game. I mean, after that Michigan game, I honestly felt bad for the kid, but he was done in his mind, and it's like, we'll see how much heart you got, and I think that he comes out and he plays his butt off. I've seen Georgia look human. I don't think they lose, but I think Ohio State gives them all they can handle, maybe jumps out to an early lead on them, and we see a barn burner.
That'd be great.
Yeah,
I don't know if I believe it, but that would be great. That'd be very exciting. Be good for football.
I think previous precedent 8 years ago, God forbid, Ohio State was coming in basically in the same position. You know what I mean? The only thing is they didn't get punched in the face going into the tail end of the season as they did. They lost early when they beat Bama in the championship. But I think that's a pretty legit contest for them. And again, I think the Buckeyes, if they heal up and if they have flat first halves, this is going to be an interesting game in the second half. I think it's going to be settled by a field goal, to be honest. Whether that be in overtime or in regulation, it'll be 3 or less. And I legitimately think that's going to be the game to watch, to be honest, because moving into the next contest, TCU and Michigan, we'll let Joe kind of lead off here, but it'll be interesting to see what happens. But what are your thoughts on TCU and Michigan?
Well, I won't start off with what everybody else is starting off with. I'll say what would keep TCU in this football game. There's two things you've got to do. First of all, let them run because they're going to get their yards. Don't let them hit the deep pass and make Michigan beat you with the intermediate pass game and somehow simplify their offense long enough to hang 35 on them. No one's done that all year. Max Duggan, as long as that kid's putting one foot in front of the other, I would never count him out of the game. I love watching that guy play. I do think that Michigan is too dynamic on offense. I do think that they're going to be able to move the ball. Also, the other thing is TCU is going to have a lead at halftime. If this game is even within one score to Michigan's favor, forget about it in the second half. They're not a team you're going to outgas. They've had 3 games where they were losing at halftime. They won them all by over 20 points. One of them they won by 30. Okay, they're a second half team. They've proven it all year long. And with JJ hitting his passes and finally linking up with Cornelius Johnson, they're on a rhythm. And who knows? You talk about getting healthy. Donovan Edwards takes that cast off his hand, and he's the best receiving back I've ever seen at Michigan. He couldn't catch a pass against Ohio State, and he still rattled off 225. So I don't think TCU will be able to contain that enough. I think Michigan covers. I don't think it's a blowout. I think Michigan covers like 38-24. And they just kind of pull away third quarter, goes in close at the half, and they do what they did against Ohio State and close it out in the third.
Yeah, it's fair. Dano, what about you?
Yeah, I feel like we've seen TCU's ceiling against K-State. Like, they're a good team. They can definitely score a lot of points, but they don't have the world's greatest defense. And in a game like this, trying to outscore a really good team in Michigan, like, it reminds me of all the old AFC versus NFC Super Bowls back in the day when, in the 80s, you'd see some pass-happy AFC team, usually the Bills, come out against a defensive heavy NFC team that would just kick their asses. And if that's not what happens, I'll be surprised. I like TCU, but yeah.
I legitimately think like this is going to come down to quarterback play, right? If JJ keeps his head on straight like he has the last 3 weeks, that's easy road for Michigan. If he gets rattled and it becomes a duel between, Max Duggan and JJ who's struggling, then that's going to be an interesting contest because Duggan's a beast, man. Like, I don't think anybody doubts one, the heart of that kid, literally, and then the ability to close out games. And I still think in that Big 12 championship, had they not taken a knee and tried to intentionally play for overtime, and everybody knows this, like if you've ever played any sport ever in your life, you don't play not to lose, you play to win. If you're playing to win, if you're playing to win, I think that the outcome of that game against K-State would have been slightly different because Duggan, he might have been smoked, took you guys down, you were over midfield. All right, then pull him, let him catch his breath, throw him on an oxygen tank, and let the backup do his thing. Like, hey, look, here's your chance to stand the man. Let's finish the game out. But I think diving into the psyche of it all is probably what's going to be the difference. Like, whichever quarterback shows up and plays the best game, and I think that's in all four of these contests. Whichever quarterback has the best game, that's the team that's going to win. Maybe not statistically, it's going to be like that one smart decision, like, hey, I throw the ball away rather than trying to throw it in traffic, or I tuck it in and run it when, I don't normally do that. I think that's going to be the biggest difference in both of these contests, and I'm looking forward to seeing the end of it. So without further ado, we will give your predictions for the college football playoff final on January 9th. What two teams are we seeing? Dan, you first.
Yeah, Georgia and Michigan. Ohio State probably does have the best chance of anyone against Georgia, but I just think Georgia's defense is too good. And like I said, we've seen TCU's ceiling. I've never had an issue with who's in the playoff, but I think that there are clearly two better teams and then two other teams that, one of them lost their championship game and one didn't even make it to their championship game. Like, what are you going to do? It is what it is.
Joe, how about you?
Yeah, I've got Georgia and Michigan. I do believe Ohio State has a better game than they did against Michigan. But as Dano already said, Georgia, you're going to have to play perfect. And I think Georgia knows what they're playing for. They've got a true tested leader in Stetson Bennett. And Michigan, I think they just, they outscore and they bully TCU in the trenches. And that's another thing about that game that I think is going to be a big mismatch is the size of our offensive line. But a fun fact about Max Duggan, he ran a 21 flat 200 meter in high school. So he may look like he's lumbering, but dude can fly. So if Michigan doesn't put the clamps down on him running the ball, it could be a very interesting game. But I think Michigan knows what they're dealing with him, puts the same kind of spy they did on CJ Stroud and gets the job done. And I'm not betting against Michigan at all for the rest of the year. So I know everyone will probably take Georgia if that's the case, but I'm going to roll with my Wolverines, who will be 14-0 at that point because they haven't got the L yet. So I can't lose faith in them then.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to be the dark horse guy. I would be the even super dark horse guy if I said TCU and Ohio State, but I think that would be madness, and you would be checking what prescription drugs I'm using. So
plus 3,000 on FanDuel.
Yeah, legitimately, I think Ohio State does have a chance. We've seen them in this situation before. I think they'll be able to put it together. I think, like Joe said, they'll play a much better game. I am going to call a rematch of the game in the college football playoff championship with Michigan edging them by 10 because healthy running game for the Buckeyes. I think that's going to be the difference against Georgia. I think, the way to keep Stetson Bennett off the field is keeping Stetson Bennett off the field. And so if they have a running game, they're going to put the clamps on him and force him to play pressure ball. And I don't think he likes to be played under pressure. And then the other part of it is name a defensive backfield anywhere in the country that is going to be able to stop Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yeah, that's fair. It's not about the backfield. It's definitely about the front seven. I agree with you on that one, but we'll see. That's not crazy. I am curious to know if you're the network, like you're broadcasting this thing and you're trying to draw the biggest numbers, would you rather have a rematch of Michigan, Ohio State or Georgia, Michigan?
Michigan.
You think so?
Yeah, I
just
think because
Georgia,
of the money that you'd lose out on the South and the SEC if they didn't come in. But sorry about that, Conrad. Go ahead.
No, you're fine. And I absolutely agree. Like, honestly, like if I'm programming this money wise, I want to see two separate teams from two separate conferences play, and I don't care which two conferences it is. So if it's Ohio State and TCU, that's a great game. That's a great matchup because those guys will hang about a bajillion points if those two actually did make it to the playoff. If it's Georgia and Michigan, I think of the first matchup with Kirby and Nick Saban. in the championship game, I think it's going to be that close. I legitimately think it'll be that close because, again, like Georgia has 2 secret weapons and everybody knows who they are. It's their tight ends, and those guys are game breakers. And I think legitimately, if those 2 dudes get hot, I don't know who could, I mean, it's basically, is Brock Bowers or, Marvin Harrison Jr. going to have the career game? Maybe both of them do.
Yeah.
And that would be that would be great for us as fans. That would be frightening for the defensive coaches. But I legitimately think, like, between those 2 players, there's so much talent on the field that this is going to be this is one of the most anticipated playoffs that I've seen in a while, just because I'm excited. Like the last time I was really following it, and it was like, okay, well, who's going to win? And you're watching it and you're like, okay, well, I'm not so surprised that LSU ran the table, a few years ago. But like this, it's the teams are just good enough that there's going to be some good games, because, again, I think, last year was kind of a fluke. I think, honestly, for Michigan, they had the emotional high going into the playoff, because, like, who did they play last year? Iowa. It was like a scrimmage in the Big 12 championship for them. And so they kind of just carried a little bit of momentum into that game, and then they fell flat when they played in the playoff game. I don't think they're going to have that same kind of mentality this year. As Joe and I were talking earlier, I legitimately think that this team is a lot more mature than they were last season, and I honestly think the big difference between last year's team and this year's team is they actually believe in their coach. I legitimately think like Jim Harbaugh has made a believer of everyone in college football. 2
years ago, he was on the hot seat, and people were like, how long is he going to be here? And where are we now? It's crazy.
Oh, how the tide has turned. But, it looks like he's finally got in place what he wants to have in place. And man, it's a lot of fun to be a Michigan fan right now.
Yeah. And I think this weekend is just going to be another one of those, like, wild weekends in college football. So, hey, for 2 O's and an NCO, we're going to be closing out the show. This will be our second to the last one. So this is our pentenad. I can't even say it. Forget about it. I was trying to be all fancy and use big college words, but I can't use them today. Anyway, the penultimate. There we go. This is our penultimate episode. So, like,
Dr. Colonel Rob.
Yeah, drink with your pinky up, guys. But we're closing this thing out. So it's Rob the Angry Colonel out of Fayetteville, North Carolina. We've got Dano Ikebesa coming out of Coastal Connecticut, and 13-0, hoping to be 14-0. Trigger Joe coming out of the home of the big house. Yeah. Hey, this has been a great season. We love it. We got one more for you. We'll do a post blast of the championship game. So that'll be around the 9th or the 10th of January. And then we are going to be in full off-season mode. However, if you have anybody that you know that wants to be a corporate sponsor for this show, let us know, because we're going to add a corporate sponsor to this. We've been co-promoting this with the Veteran Trash Talk Hour. Kind of let the other half see how the O's do it. They have great programming, and I appreciate Joe coming on this season. He's been a great asset to the team, and we love to cross promote with those guys, because, again, their mission is just as important as getting the word out about Army football and service academies and everything else. But they truly give, a large portion of their profits to stop veteran suicide. And since we are in the holiday season, if you have not done it already, reach out to a friend that you haven't talked to in a while, because a lot of people are hurting, and the statistics are scary on the number of people that have a mishap or some kind of crazy family thing happen over the holidays. So don't forget in your celebration of your college football to reach out to your buddy and just text him, even if he's a Michigan fan or or if his team is sitting at home, since Christmas. But reach out to them, and hey, we appreciate you guys checking us out, and we will talk to you guys next time. Thanks.
Beat them.
Thanks for listening to the Ask for Football College Football Roundtable. Tune in next week as the AFF team brings you more hot takes and college football analysis. We'd like to thank our sponsor, BuyerBarn.com. BuyerBarn.com is the world's first platform to perform online auctions and sales for farm animals. BuyerBarn.com is dedicated to helping small farmers in America and are extending a special discount to military veterans who want to help in the revolution of the family farm. Go to BuyerBarn.com/military. That's BuyerBarn.com, BYREBARN.com to learn more and to get started, or email them at info@BuyerBarn.com. Thanks again for listening to As for Football, College Football Roundtable, and as always, beat Navy.
Dumb too. Oh, I got one more Christmas present to show you guys. This is the screaming goat. See how it's an actual goat? I don't know if you guys can see, but
Yeah.
Nice.
all right. Sorry.
Excellent.
I'm in total professional mode now.
Yes.